All right, welcome into today's show. I'm joined by Michael Underwood with 931 Barbecue out of Shelbyville, Tennessee, about an hour south of the Nashville, Tennessee area. Excited to have Michael on the show because Michael's actually our first SCA team, Steak Champion or Steak Cookoff Association, excuse me. He's our first SCA team to come on the show. So we're excited. So thanks for being here, Michael. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So for our listeners, make sure to do a couple of things after the episode. Check out 931 Barbecue on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. So he is making some things happen on TikTok. But yeah, make sure to check out all the cool things he's doing in the steak world. And so one question I always ask Michael, every single guest is, it's about journey, right? It's about the journey into this competitive sport of steak, barbecue, whatever it may be. Educate us a little bit. How did all this start? How did this journey start for you?
Well, I guess here, like most people recently, I guess it pretty much, stemmed from COVID, being bored and which I'm a truck driver. I drive a semi for FedEx every day. So all I do is listen to podcasts every day. And I've always liked Malcolm Reed's stuff, and his podcast in the very beginning, he talked a whole lot about the SCA because he liked to cook a lot of them. So I that kind of got me interested because it's a 1-day deal and it's not as expensive as barbecue. And I've always had to, ever since barbecue pitmasters come on, I've always had to wanted to do barbecue and stuff. So that's really going to be my passion is the barbecue, I think. But the SCA is a good way to get started in the, getting more comfortable about turning in meats and stuff like that, timelines and all that stuff. So
that's exactly right. And you make a great point, Michael. For those that haven't ventured into the competitive world, the SCA, the Steak Cookoff Association, is a great way to start and get involved in food competition because, Michael, to your point, there's very little expense. So it's a great way to get out there, meet some good folks. And so tell us about, I know you said COVID had something to do with it. You listened to Malcolm Reed's podcast. How has this journey gone? Because I know you've experienced some pretty good success, right?
Yeah, I did pretty good the last year. I pretty much hit a pretty good stride, I guess, but the way it is now, I could only do maybe 1 or 2 comps a month, if that, I might have to skip a month, but it seemed like every comp I've did this last year, I've gotten some kind of call in the top 10, and I think my first in All Good in August up there, that's around Cookville, Tennessee. That was my first place call up there, and that was pretty exciting.
So I know a lot of our listeners may not be familiar with the SCA. I've done one myself, and we did it down in South Georgia, down at the Fire Ant Festival as part of a Georgia Barbecue Association ancillary event. Had a great time. Really, really enjoyed it. We were fortunate to take 3rd place in that contest on our first one, so we were super happy about that. But it is a lot different. It's a lot different than, a KCBS backyard or an MBN or even, really it's a lot different than pretty much anything you'll find out there. So walk us through that process, right? So for you, when it's Friday, what does Friday look like getting ready for an SCA competition?
Well, now I got a little 6x12 trailer. I make sure I got everything in it loaded. I don't keep my seasons in a trailer because they don't like moisture, so they'll get moisture in them out there. So I keep them in the house, in the closet. I got all fixed up for it. So I make sure to get everything loaded up and figure out if we're going to stay the night or whatever we're going to do. But I try to stay where I can drive back home that evening, most time because we got so many around this area. It's pretty easy to do, make it back home every day, after the cook. But yeah, I just make sure I got everything that I need and seasoning, your foil pans, make sure all your batteries are good and your thermometers and all that good stuff. Cause I have went out in my, my little infrared thermometer to check the grates. The batteries was dead in it, and that was pretty terrible.
I bet that's a pretty tough feeling, especially when you don't have a whole lot of time and you have to move quickly. And I think you touched on this, earlier when you talked about, obviously it's more cost effective. It's less expensive to do an SCA. There's less time commitment because at the end of the day, you're cooking a steak, you're cooking a ribeye. So it doesn't take long to cook one, right?
Yeah. No.
And I think, you made a great point though, and that was around timelines. And I think that one of the biggest things that we struggle with as a new barbecue team, going back about a year and a half ago was timelines. And I think a lot of teams, whether they're SCA or MBN or really any of the sanctioning bodies, I think that they struggle a good bit with timelines when they're starting out. So for you, where was the struggle when you first started? Was it timelines or was it something else?
Yeah, it's definitely your timeline, trying to figure out what you're gonna, what time you need to get your steak marinated by, and then season. And then, I like to warm my steak up some before I put it on the grill. So I got to allow time for that because I don't want to put a cold steak on there. And the way I do stuff, it might end up getting too dark, a darker steak and stuff like it's just all that different stuff you got to factor in. It's like getting to the cook's meeting. Most of the time they're 9 o'clock, I think, most of the time. But here lately they've been changing timelines around on us a little bit for different stuff. But yeah, I got a whiteboard in my trailer, and that's what I write down all my turn-in times, what time I need to start seasoning, and all that stuff. That's a must. You got to keep up with it. Time will get away from you fast on these SCA comps.
Now, are you a solo cooker, or do you have a helper with you?
I bring my wife, my daughter most of the time. They're with me.
So it's a family affair.
Yep. Yeah. My wife don't like the stress of the competition, but she hangs in there with me. My first comp we went to was in Decatur, Alabama. We went to one down there. It was my first one. It was a Lily Flag place, campground park. It was right on the river. It's a real pretty place. That's a perfect place for a cook. And of course, my first one, that's where the battery went dead on my infrared thermometer.
Sure.
Or I found out if you leave them out in the sun, that infrared thermometer, it gets overheated and it won't read neither.
Right.
So you got to make sure you keep them out of the sun, keep them in the shade. And it's just a whole bunch of little stuff you got to. Right now, after 2.5 years, it's starting to get second nature pretty much. But it's a learning curve. You got to learn,
So you talked about one thing you mentioned that I've heard a lot of folks ask about when they're cooking steak is you talked about making sure you're warming that steak up a little bit so that you're not putting it on the grill cold. Why is that?
I put my grill marks on 90% of the time. I got a minute and 20 seconds per turn, where you turn your steak to get your grill marks. I like for my grates to be about 550. That's not, that's hot, but it's not super hot. I know people that run them a lot hotter than that. But when you go to put the steak up on the riser, you don't want it sitting in there 20 minutes trying to get up to temperature, because it's eventually going to get really hot in the grill doing that. And that's just the way I figured out that it just works best for me of putting it on around 70 degrees or so. That way it's on the riser. I can put it on the riser most time. It's only there about at the most 10 minutes,
Sure.
Trying to come up to temp.
One piece of advice that I got, I actually bought the online class from Melissa Overson, I believe is her last name. Yeah. And one great piece of advice from that class is, she actually will take the steak, and if it's a hotter day, she'll put it in the dashboard in the truck to warm it up. And I'm a big believer, if it's not broke, don't fix it. That's exactly what we did down in Ashburn.
Yep.
And I'll be brutally honest with you, we really had no clue what we were doing. But it was a lot of fun, and we ended up screwing up the grill marks. And so we just said, we're just going to sear it. And, It worked out well. It was a lot of fun. And, I mean, you can do, now I believe, they do doubles and even triples. Is that correct?
Yeah, I've done doubles. I haven't done a triple yet. I did a Friday night and then 2 Saturday. I've done that.
Yeah. And that's the
But
beauty, I think, too, of folks looking to get into competitive cooking, right? Doesn't have to be barbecue, but competitive cooking as a whole. I think, you look at the equipment is not nearly as much as you would need for a full scale barbecue contest.
No.
The entry fees, are less. If you're fortunate, like you, and you're in the Nashville, I know Nashville has dozens and dozens of different SCA competitions. In the Augusta, Georgia area, we don't have any. Hopefully we can change that. So we're a little bit, we don't have the luxury of having it right down the road for us. And I think what I've noticed anyway is that a lot of the other sanctioning bodies are starting to include SCA, like on a Friday night type of thing, which is what we did down in Ashburn. But I'm curious. So when you were starting out, so I know the barbecue community is, for the most part, pretty helpful, especially wanting to help new people getting into it. Did you find that was the case with the SCA as well? Did you have people that were willing to help?
Oh yeah, definitely. Probably one of the main people that helped me a lot was Sonny Moody.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, her and her husband, they were great help. And then there's tons of other people that's helped me plenty too, but they were pretty instrumental with helping me. And then of course BBQ Champs. It's hard to beat BBQ Champs Academy.
It is indeed. Curious, which did you go to the in-person class, or did you just buy one of the online courses?
I bought the online courses. I've taken 3. I've took Terry Rome's, John Lindsay's, and Matt Overson's, Melissa's brother.
That's right. Well, they're a tandem, aren't they? They're tearing it up on the steak circuit.
Yeah, they sure do.
And I think that's the beauty of it too. For those that are looking to get into this in any sort of competitive food category. If you think back, 20, 30 years ago, you didn't have all this. You didn't have YouTube. You didn't have, online classes. And so the learning curve was, much, much more difficult. Now, you invest some time, invest your money, of course, and you can take these classes from folks that have, want it. You get to rub elbows with people like, Sunny, who's an awesome person. I got to meet her in Nashville back in July. She was a great help back then, and no surprise to hear that she's, been a huge help for you. And what better advice to get than from the world? I think let me get this right. It's the world food steak champion, I think is what is the correct title for 2021. Yep. So now how do you see 2023 playing out for you guys? How many cooks do you have on the calendar?
Well, as of right now, I have at least one a month. It depends on how good I do. If I go out and I start, if I can make a comp pay for another comp, I'll just ride it out, till I can't ride it no more, but
that's right.
As of right now, I can afford without, winning anything to do one a month. So we'll see how that works, which I got my first barbecue comp in Gadsden in April. That's going to be my first backyard.
Okay, so you're jumping over to the backyard KCBS side of things.
Yeah, that's what I'm gonna try it out, because I've cooked. They've had ancillaries at the SCA events, and I love cooking ribs, and I've entered 3 of the rib ancillaries, and I finished 4th 2 times and 9th or 8th 1 time. So every time I'm entered, I've got calls, and that's pretty much was KCBS recipe I was going to use. So
that's right. I tell you, speaking of BBQ Champs, there's a lot of great, pit masters and champions as part of that program. But one of the best, in fact, the very first online course I bought was Robbie Royals online course from BBQ Champs, and can't recommend that enough. I mean, that really helped us, figure some of it out as when it comes to the GBA. So
Yeah.
like I said, I think that everything, I think it's Mike Steele is his name. I think everything he's doing with those courses is it's great. Because at the end of the day, let's face it, this is something that I'm very passionate about. We as cook teams, whether it's SCA, MBN, KCBS, GBA, IBCA, doesn't matter. I think we as cook teams have to understand that in order for the sport to continue and to grow and thrive, we have to be relatable. We have to engage, with the public. And I think that's one thing that I've seen some of these great pitmasters do is they take the time to answer questions, chat with the public, build those relationships. And I saw that at the SCA competition we did down in Ashburn. So I guess where I'm going with all that is, from your standpoint, just in your opinion, it's no secret that, competition barbecue, competition cooking is, took a hit 2 years ago, took a big hit, a lot of things did, of course. But I'm curious from your standpoint. So we know COVID impacted a lot of things, but I think even before that time, we were starting to see a decline in the number of competitions, the number of teams, et cetera. And COVID, of course, really, helped that along as well in a bad way.
Yeah.
But from your standpoint, I mean, how do we as teams, right? How do we as cooks, continue to bring up the next generation, continue to make sure that, we're building those relationships with the public, make sure they understand, why we're passionate about it. How do we keep this all, thriving is really the question. What would you say there?
Yeah, that's definitely a thing. We got to figure out how to get the public more involved, which I love it when to a detriment to me. I love it when the public wants to come out and talk about what we're doing and all this stuff, because I'll get lost talking to people, and then next thing I know, I need to be cooking, or whatever. Right. But yeah, we definitely need to figure out some way to get the public's money's got to help. We got to figure out a way to make the public's money, make them want to spend money to find out what we're doing, or, I know some of them got People's Choice of, contests and all that stuff, most time for like pork butt and stuff like that. But yeah, I don't know. That's something, of course, Barbecue USA, stuff like that's going to help. I think, Barbecue Pitmasters helped tremendously, I believe, when it was on. And so hopefully we can get Barbecue USA to bring some of that back to get other cooks interested in cooking,
That's exactly right. I'm glad to see, from what I understand, they're coming out with a second season of Barbecue USA. So I'm excited to see what that looks like. And, the People's Choice, I think is historically that's the go-to for a lot of these competitions. I think that there are other options out there that may be more compelling. I even had a guest on my show who talked about, giving teams additional points if they're willing to, put themselves out there and say, hey, we'll spend, an hour between 9 and 10 on a Saturday with the general public, or whatever it may be, something like that.
Yeah.
Which I think is, hey, if you're starting if you're cooking a KCBS and you're already starting off with an extra point or two, that can mean all the difference come awards. So I just, for me, it's something that I enjoy teaching how to barbecue. I enjoy learning it. And if it's over a fire or if it's outside cooking, like, I enjoy it. I want to learn how to do it. I want to teach others how to do it. And I understand that not everybody shares that same sentiment.
Yeah.
I understand that there are some teams out there that just want to stay in their RVs and want to be left alone. And that's okay. The problem is, in my opinion, if every team does that, or if the majority of teams do that, then I think the sport as we know it will eventually die.
Yeah.
And, that's my concern. And so I like the idea of, like you said, the people's choice. It's always a good one. That's probably more difficult, I think, to do with an SCA.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know how that would work, but I want to shift gears for just a second and chat about failure. Everybody loves to talk about success. Everybody loves to talk about third place, first place, all this other fun stuff, winning money. Not many people like to talk about failure, but I believe that in most cases, you actually learn more from failure than you do from success.
Yeah.
And I'm curious for you, if you look back, so you've been, cooking SCA for about 2.5 years. If you look back on your, on that time span, what were some of those failures along the way? Or another way to think about it is what were some of those tough lessons learned?
Let's see. I knew you was going to ask me this, and I thought about it all day. But I don't know. I guess maybe my first DAL in steak was at a BBQ event down in Opelika, Alabama. That's the first time I cooked by myself that day too. So that was, having all my stuff in order. I relied so much on my wife to help me have everything ready. And, if you're going to cook by yourself, you got to practice by yourself. You got to.
Right.
That's one thing I learned. If I'm going to, which I'm comfortable with cooking by myself now. If I got to, I will. But then I wouldn't, you got to be prepared like the Boy Scouts, always be prepared. And you gotta, like I say, I wish I had a practice by myself, because there's little stuff that she does or my daughter does, like having my aluminum foil ready or, just running a timer for me, little stuff like that, because I ended up overcooking the steak bad, just because I didn't reset the timer the last time. And, it just got away from me. It's easy to do. Yeah.
And DAL for our listeners is dead ass last, in case you were wondering.
Dead ass last. Yeah.
We've gotten a couple of those. So I think if you do it long enough, you'll probably get one or two.
Yeah.
But
if you ain't, you're not doing it right. So,
that's right. You're not. You need. That's exactly
trying
right.
Hard enough.
You ain't doing it right if you don't get a couple of DALs along the way. But it's those little things, I think, that are so critical that a lot of people just, they don't think about. They don't really understand, all like getting the foil ready, that takes time, but all those little things add up,
Yep.
So I'm curious though, you talked about, you've talked about temperature and you sound like you come off as somebody that's very, very particular. Like you're going to cook it at 550 degrees, not 549, not 551, right? You're going to cook it.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, are you going more off of temp or are you going off of look and feel, or is it a combination?
No, I'm a big temperature guy. I'm going to go by, I mean, even, if my infrared thermometer goes out now, I've messed with the grill enough to know I can pretty much feel it with my glove on and everything to where the grate should be really close to where it's at. So I have learned that over time. But yeah, it's definitely got to be a temperature thing on the steaks. I'm not the one to feel your thumb there, to feel the doneness. I'm not trusting that,
Yeah, you're more precise. Let me ask you this though, and this I think is a big deal, right? This is where, I think the great pit masters, the great steak cooks separate themselves from the good, and that is the ability to adapt and overcome. So let's just play this out. Let's say, you're cooking and your infrared goes out. Your internal meat probe goes out, right? So now you're flying blind. How do you overcome that?
I guess if I had to, I kind of sort of could feel, when it's getting close, and I could tell by 90% of the time the way the outside of my steak looks, how dark it's getting to where it ought to be getting close, but I got backups for backups now. So if one of them goes out, I got my thermopin right there too, but I like to run my needle probe in the steak while it's coming to temperature. after I get it up on the riser. Most time when I get done doing my marks, my steak's about 115 degrees. So 80% of the time, that's where it's at. 85% of the time, that's where it's at. So
Yeah.
unless it's really humid outside or something like that, or super cold.
Right.
But
And you bring up another good point. It's like the old saying, if you have one, one is none and two is one. So backups to the backups, I think is important. And I bring that up because we've had that happen to us, where we were flying blind and we didn't do very well, and that's okay. But what I learned from that is I learned that I was relying on my instruments too much.
Yeah.
And so I forced myself to do away with the instruments at home. I still use them, if we're at a competition, but at home, I really just go by look and feel, so that if I'm ever in that situation, I can, still make things happen. But in your case, you probably got four or five backups. So,
what's on steak, see, it's not like barbecue. Barbecue, we can go off feel, the ribs, you go off feel, that's the way I pull them, is on feel. But the steak, I wish I could figure out how to go off feel on the steak.
Yeah. So as we wind down, and again, for our listeners, we're chatting with Michael Underwood out of Shelbyville, Tennessee, 931 Barbecue. Make sure to go follow him on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok. Maybe he'll post some more TikTok videos for us.
Yeah, I'll try.
But as we wind down the show, what are some parting words of wisdom that you have for those listeners that are looking to get into, doing more SCA events?
If you bomb your first comp, don't give up on the first one, which I went to my first one, I finished just by watching Malcolm Reed videos. I finished middle of the pack. I think out of 50-something people, I finished middle of the pack. I think I was 23rd, my first cook ever, So it's just, practice. It's a lot cheaper practicing steak than it is barbecue, most time. But
that's true.
But definitely just practice. And even if you can't afford a BBQ Champs Academy, you can even skip a comp to do it. It's $175. It might be $190 now, I think, maybe. But you look at a steak comp now, they're $160 for a single, So you could almost skip one and take a video.
Right.
And all the videos that they got different, people are using different cookers,
Yep.
So most of the time, one of them is going to have a grill that you're going to use, so.
That's right.
Which I love my PKs. So I got a PK Go now, and it's hard to beat.
PK is a big name in the SCA. I'd never heard of them until I started, getting into this crazy sport of competitive barbecue and steaks and everything else. So, but yeah, they are a huge name in the SCA world. All right, last question, and it has to do with cooking steak at home. So, are you a SPG guy, or do you have a certain rub that you like to use at the house when you're cooking? Mainly, I want to try to help folks listen and make a better steak at the house.
Yep. If it's me cooking a steak at the house, I'm going to put the Be Extreme steak dust. That's my favorite rub on a steak at home. It's hard to beat salt and pepper on a good steak. If you got a cheap steak, you got to do something to it.
That's right.
Salt and pepper ain't going to cut it, So, and I only buy cheap steaks most times.
Well, you got to save your money for all those competitions, right?
Well, I do. They give you 2 steaks to pick from. If I do a double, you get 4 steaks. I do one practice steak, bring the other one home. So I got one to practice with at home. That's a good steak.
There you go. That is a good steak. Good idea. So, well, I've enjoyed it, sir. We appreciate you coming on the show, Michael. And again, for our listeners, make sure to follow him, 931 BBQ, Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok. And thanks for joining us, Michael.
Yes, sir. Appreciate it.